For the Ringer Podcast Network, this is Dissect, long-form musical analysis broken into short, digestible episodes. This is episode 16 of our season-long analysis of Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I'm your host, Cole Kushna. Last time on Dissect, we examined Mr. Morale's title track, where Kendrick described undergoing a spiritual awakening, accessing what Eckhart Tolle describes as the transcendent dimension of conscious awareness that resides within all of us. This shift allows Kendrick to detach from his ego and observe trauma with inner clarity and emotional accountability, beginning the process of breaking the cycle of generational pain. Mr. Morale then ends with the album's final insight from Eckhart Tolle, playing the role of Kendrick's therapist.
People get taken over by this pain body because this energy field that almost has a life of its own, it needs to periodically feed on more unhappiness.
We covered Tolle's concept of the pain body at length in our episode on We Cry Together. As a refresher, the pain body is an energetic field of old emotional trauma that lives within individuals and feeds on negativity and drama. It's built up from past personal suffering as well as inherited pain passed down through generations. When a person is unaware of their pain body, it unconsciously drives their thoughts and behavior, creating new pain and perpetuating suffering. Recall that we interpreted the drama of We Cry Together as a pain body feeding, where the couple's pain bodies were activated and both became totally unconscious, attempting to inflict as much pain on each other as possible. This is what Tolle is referring to when he says people get taken over by their pain bodies, and that it needs to feed on more unhappiness to replenish itself. Pain bodies create an addiction to suffering and drama. Tolle also claims that the pain body is not only individual, but collective, meaning that entire groups of people can carry a shared emotional history that affects their collective consciousness. To quote A New Earth directly, in Black Americans too, the collective pain body is pronounced. Their ancestors were violently uprooted, beaten into submission, and sold into slavery. The foundation of American economic prosperity rested on the labor of 4 to 5 million Black slaves. In fact, the suffering inflicted on Native and Black Americans has not remained confined to those two races, but has become part of the collective American pain body. It is always the case that both victim and perpetrator suffer the consequences of any acts of violence, oppression, or brutality. For what you do to others, you do to yourself, unquote. Like his antidote for unconsciousness and the ego, Tolle teaches that the key to dissolving the pain body is conscious awareness, bringing presence to emotional pain without identifying with it. When you notice the pain body arising, you observe the emotion directly, allowing it to be felt without letting it take you over and control your behavior. This awareness interrupts the pain body cycle and prevents it from renewing itself, as the pain body, quote, can only feed on thoughts that are aligned with its own energy. Presence stops that feeding, unquote. As Tolle's last appearance on the album, the pain body lesson serves as the final key in Kendrick's spiritual transformation. It equips him with the awareness needed to observe his trauma without identifying with it, setting the stage for the narrative climax of Mother I Sober. This clarity allows Kendrick to confront, name, and begin to dissolve the generational pain that has plagued him and his ancestors for centuries.
I'm sensitive, I feel everything, I feel everybody. One man, standing on two words, heal everybody, transformation.
Produced by Sounwave, J Pounds, and Bekon, Mother I Sober opens with a sparse arrangement, a tender, probing piano, and a light kick drum. This intimate musical setting is the clearest embodiment of the piano's confessional role on the album. Recall that Sounwave said the piano was a character on the album and described the world of Mr. Morale as, quote, a person stripped down of everything, locked into a white room with just their thoughts and a piano. Of all the songs on the project, Mother I Sober brings that image to life most vividly. In the album's theatrical context, we can imagine Kendrick alone on stage, seated at the piano beneath a single spotlight. The piano part itself makes use of a technique called pedal tone, where a single note repeats over and over while chords change around it. Pedal tone is often used to create emotionally riveting musical settings. One of the more famous examples can be heard in Hans Zimmer's score for the film Interstellar, which contains a repeating E-note pedal tone. You might recall our discussion of pedal tone back on the very first episode of this season, as United in Grief also contains a pedal tone piano.
I grieve different. I grieve different.
As the album opener, United in Grief introduced the weight of collective trauma, the central tension that hangs unresolved over the entire record. Now, at its emotional climax, that very same musical language returns in Mother I Sober, where Kendrick finally confronts and begins to dissolve the trauma he inherited. The pedal tone piano creates a connective musical thread that bonds the start and end of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers together, both sonically and thematically. It's a subtle but brilliant detail, the first of many full circle moments we're going to encounter on Mother I Sober. Another one emerges when we revisit the mirrored version of the album's tracklist. As we've been tracking throughout the second half of the season, each song on Disc 2 reflects a corresponding song on Disc 1. Mother I Sober's mirrored companion is N95, a song named after a mask and centered on the ways we hide our trauma and imperfections behind ego and materialism. Over the course of Mr. Morale, we've witnessed Kendrick begin the hard work of removing those masks. That process has led us to this moment, where Kendrick's finally ready to see himself clearly. In other words, if N95 exposes the masks we wear, Mother I Sober reveals what it looks like when those masks come all the way off.
I'm sensitive, I feel everything, I feel everybody. One man, standing on two words, heal everybody. Transformation, then reciprocation, karma must return. Heal myself, secrets that I hide, buried in these words. Death threats, ego must die, but I let it purge, pacify, broken pieces of me. It was all a
Kendrick enters the song cautiously, his voice timid and wavering. He speaks in sparse lyrical fragments, and I want you to notice how each line is composed of 3 defined phrases separated by slight pauses. He opens with, I'm sensitive, pause, I feel everything, pause, I feel everybody. The second line is structured the same, one man, pause, standing on 2 words, pause, heal everybody. This broken 3-phrase structure of each line will persist throughout most of the song, building a quiet tension. And as we'll experience, this tension sets up a powerful moment of catharsis when the pattern finally breaks and Kendrick reclaims his power with full, fluid commandments. Now, coupled with this fragmented lyrical structure is the song's fragmented narrative structure. It will soon become clear that Kendrick breaks the memories of his childhood trauma into pieces that are dispersed throughout the song's 3 verses. In other words, he doesn't tell the story linearly. He'll reveal a detail about his childhood in one line, then suddenly pivot to the present day describing himself in nature in the next. He'll return to his childhood for a few lines, only to pivot again to a conversation between him and Whitney. One reason for this fragmented storytelling was revealed on the previous track, Mr. Morale, where Kendrick said, shit on my mind and it's heavy. Tell you in pieces cause it's way too heavy. However, beyond the sheer weight of the subject matter, I believe the fragmented structure of Mother I Sober is symbolic of 2 things. First, it reflects the way trauma is stored and processed in the mind and body. Psychologists have long observed that traumatic memories are not encoded like ordinary ones. Instead, they're often stored as fragments, flashes of sensation, emotion, or imagery, disconnected from narrative structure. As Bessel van der Kolk writes in The Body Keeps the Score, quote, trauma is not stored as a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. Instead, it's stored as fragments of sensory information, images, sounds, physical sensations without context, unquote. We're going to experience this directly in Kendrick's delivery. His story is not recounted, it's relived. Lines repeat, details surface out of order. He returns again and again to the same few moments almost compulsively, as if caught in a loop he can't escape. This mirrors what trauma specialists call re-experiencing, where the body and the brain relive past pain involuntarily, especially when that pain was never fully processed or validated. In this way, the fragmented lyrical and narrative form of Mother I Sober embodies the very form of trauma. There's also a more symbolic dimension to this fragmentation, one that connects directly to the album's central symbol of a mirror. Here at the album's narrative and emotional climax, Mother I Sober is Kendrick finally standing in front of the mirror with his mask off, and the reflection staring back at him isn't whole, it's fractured, it's imperfect. The song's broken lines and scattered memories mirror the broken image of self he's confronting. Each lyrical fragment is a shard of that mirror, each narrative pivot a crack in the glass. Indeed, Mother I Sober is what healing sounds like before you become whole.
I'm sensitive, I feel everything, I feel everybody. One man, standing on two words, heal everybody. Transformation, then reciprocation, karma must return. Heal myself, secrets that I hide, buried in these words. Death threats, ego must die, but I let it purge, pacify. Broken pieces of me, it was all a blur. Mother cried, put they hands.
In terms of the album's narrative, Kendrick's opening phrase, "I'm sensitive, I feel everything," is nothing short of a revelation. It's a direct reflection point of Mother I Sober's mirror track N95, where Kendrick rapped, "I'm done with the sensitive, taking it personal." On the previous track, Mr. Morale, Kendrick admitted, "My habits insensitive." And on Father Time, Kendrick traced back those insensitive habits to the lessons of his childhood, where he learned, quote, "Men should never show feelings, being sensitive never helped." Sensitivity is the antithesis of the survival-based brand of stoic masculinity Kendrick inherited, where vulnerability was considered a threat to survival. So Kendrick uttering these words here at the start, confessing that he does feel, signals incredible growth. It also exemplifies Kendrick's newfound sobriety after detoxing from his addiction to sex. Rather than numbing his feelings of grief and running from his pain with vice, he's applying Eckhart Tolle's teachings and embracing them with presence and awareness, really feeling them for the first time. He then immediately expands the scope of the song beyond the individual, saying, "I feel everybody. One man, standing on two words, heal everybody." While the story to come is deeply personal, Kendrick's vulnerability is communal. He's offering himself as a conduit for the collective pain of his community, and his words as articulating a version of their own shared story. As such, Kendrick's transparent vulnerability, his declaration that he's sensitive and feels everything, pushes back against society's historical perception of Black men as unfeeling, threatening, and emotionally unavailable, a reputation that has its roots in American slavery. In his book, The Man Not, Dr. Tommy J. Curry argues that Black men have historically been denied the very status of manhood, branded instead as disposable, hypersexual, and emotionally vacant beings. Curry traces this distortion back to slavery, where Black men were stripped of autonomy, violently severed from their families, and reduced to laboring bodies. They were valued for their physicality, but denied their inner life. Their emotional pain was never acknowledged, much less permitted. The legacy of this erasure continues today in how society often fails to recognize Black male vulnerability as real or deserving of care. Curry says that in both public and academic discourse, Black men are often treated as problems to be solved rather than people to be understood. Kendrick's opening lines subvert the traditional perception of Black men directly, making clear that Mother I Sober represents more than Kendrick Lamar. This is OK Llama, his moniker that means my people, who is here on behalf of his community to voice a story that's largely gone untold. Because while the trauma is widespread, most Black men in his community have never been given the emotional language, the safety, or the space to name it. Kendrick then continues, transformation, then reciprocation, karma must return, heal myself, secrets that I hide, buried in these words. As we heard in Mr. Morale's title track, Kendrick once again mentions spiritual transformation directly, a transformation he expects to be reciprocated with good karma, improving the conditions of not only his own life, but the lives of his children and their mother Whitney. It's as if Kendrick is testing the spiritual laws of the universe directly. He's doing the hardest thing imaginable, confronting his pain, breaking his silence, and revealing his most vulnerable secrets to the world. If that kind of courage doesn't yield good karma, if radical honesty isn't enough to disrupt the cycle, then what will? Kendrick is placing his faith in the idea that truth-telling can transform suffering into something restorative. And as OK Llama, he hopes this personal transformation ripples outward, offering others a path toward healing, or, at the very least, permission to recognize their own pain in his. Kendrick then continues, death threats, ego must die, but I let it purge. Pacify, broken pieces of me, it was all a blur. He once again names the ego directly, which back on Count Me Out, he established as the Lord of all lords at the root of all his moral failures. As we talked about earlier, a critical requirement of Kendrick's transformation will be dismantling his ego and pain body that's controlled his behavior for decades. He describes this control as letting his ego purge, which we now know refers to his sex addiction and compulsive material spending, pacifiers that numbed his pain, grief, and anxiety. Importantly, Kendrick says broken pieces of me during this passage, supporting the idea that Mother I Sober is Kendrick looking into a broken mirror with his mask off, finally confronting himself to reassemble the pieces, to heal and become whole.
Blur, mother cried, put their hands on her. It was family ties, I heard it all. I should have grabbed a gun, but I was only 5. I still feel it weighing on my heart. My first tough decision in the shadows, clinging to my soul as my only critic. Where's my faith? Told you I was Christian, but just not today. I transformed, praying to the trees. God is taking shape, my mother's mother. Follow me.
Kendrick begins to unpack his trauma with the first fragmented memory of his childhood, saying, "Mother cried, put they hands on her, it was family ties." We're pulled directly into Kendrick's earliest encounter with violence inside the home, and the complexity of that violence is instantly clear. It wasn't inflicted by strangers, but family, forcing a young Kendrick to make sense of harm coming from those he was taught to trust. It reveals one of the more difficult truths about generational trauma. It's often internal, passed down through blood. The next line, "I heard it all, I should have grabbed a gun, but I was only 5, captures the impossible bind of this early experience. No longer an oblivious infant or toddler, Kendrick is now old enough to witness, but powerless to intervene. Even at 5 years old, his instinct was to meet violence with more violence, an early lesson in how trauma teaches us to defend ourselves by recreating the very harm we fear. The phrase, "but I was only 5, feels like a subtle but important moment of self-forgiveness, because as he reveals in the following line, the guilt and shame of not acting plagued him for years. He says, "I still feel it weighing on my heart, my first tough decision, in the shadows clinging to my soul as my only critic." Even decades later, the weight of that moment hasn't lifted. Over time, the trauma of that event reshaped itself into a sense of moral failure, as if Kendrick were somehow responsible for what happened to his mother. The image of little Kendrick in the shadows, haunted by a decision he never had the power to make, is absolutely devastating. In an album that frequently criticizes the judgment of others, Kendrick reveals that the harshest judgment often comes from within. No one would ever fault a 5-year-old for inaction in that moment, yet the memory of that experience and the shame attached to it became encoded into young Kendrick's sense of self. Next, we get the first of many pivots away from this central childhood experience, as Kendrick says, "Where's my faith? Told you I was Christian, but just not today. I transformed, praying to the trees. God is taking shape." Kendrick puts his faith in question, literally, then reveals lapses in his Christian morals, most likely an allusion to his sex addiction. Much of Mr. Morale has already made clear that Kendrick's spiritual framework has evolved beyond traditional Christianity. While we can't know for certain, Kendrick's turn toward other spiritual practices suggests that Christianity in its conventional form didn't fulfill his deeper emotional or existential needs entirely. For many survivors of trauma, especially those carrying generational pain, traditional religious doctrine can feel inadequate, focus more on sin and salvation than on repair or healing. Throughout the album, we've heard Kendrick incorporating the teachings of Eckhart Tolle, who encourages a spirituality anchored in the present moment, often using natural elements like flowers and trees as gateways into stillness, presence, and silent wisdom. Through these meditative practices, Kendrick has transformed, and his evolving concept of God takes shape within him. Kendrick then pivots to an image of his grandmother, saying, quote, "My mother's mother followed me for years in her afterlife, staring at me on back of some buses. I wake up at night." Kendrick's maternal grandmother passed away when he was 13. The two were very close, with Kendrick describing her as, quote, his first best friend. She was the one who introduced Kendrick to Christianity, and her passing left a huge hole in his heart.
Space, catching vapors. Grandma said I get some Jordans for my grades. That's my baby. When she died, my heart broke 100 ways. I spent my whole...
Kendrick stating his grandmother followed him for years in her afterlife reveals both a deep spiritual bond between the two, but also unprocessed grief. Thus, we get the line, "Loved her dearly, traded in my tears for a Range Rover." This is a direct reflection point with United in Grief, where Kendrick also paired a luxury car with the passing of his paternal grandmother, Estelle.
I was 9 when they put Lamont in the grave. Heartbroken when Estelle didn't say goodbye. Chad left his body after we FaceTimed, but the money wiping the tears away. I grieve different.
Kendrick reveals a through line between both grandmothers' deaths. He never fully grieved them, instead seeking escape through materialism. This is directly juxtaposed with Kendrick's present day in Mother I Sober, as he says, "Transformation, you ain't felt grief till you felt it sober." Having detoxed from his vices, guided by Tolle's teachings, Kendrick's emotions are finally free to exist without addiction, without egoic defense, without performative masculinity. He allows his grief space, sits with it fully present and awake. Importantly, he frames this emotional purge as a critical step in his transformation. As it was stated back on Savior, this is the truth that resides in the fire. The pain is a rite of passage, a necessary suffering that clears space for true healing to begin.
Wish I was somebody, anybody but myself. Oh, I wish I was somebody, anybody but myself.
Lead singer of Portishead, Beth Gibbons, enters the track to deliver the song's beautifully ethereal, devastating chorus. Born in 1965, Gibbons was in her mid-50s when recording this, a stage in life that lends her voice a resonant authority, shaped by decades of hard-earned perspective. This continues the thread of the divine feminine woven throughout the album, female figures who guide Kendrick toward emotional honesty. On multiple tracks, it was Whitney who prodded Kendrick into accountability and care. Here on Mother I Sober, Gibbons takes that role into a more spiritual register. If Whitney is the grounded feminine rooted in partnership and domestic care, then Gibbons is the ancestral presence, an elder voice of generational wisdom. Together, they represent a counterbalance to the masculine armor Kendrick is learning to dismantle. Gibbons sings a deceptively simple refrain, "I wish I was somebody, anybody but myself." Despite its brevity, these two lines distill Mr. Morale's core themes of identity and authenticity. I wish I was somebody reveals the truth beneath all of our egoic assertions of superiority, the fear that we are not enough. Behind all of the masks we wear to present ourselves as not just worthy but superior, there lies existential fear, the fear of being insignificant, of not mattering. It's the silent crisis at the core of the human condition, the worry that all of this means absolutely nothing. The second line, anybody but myself, adds a personal dimension to the existential weight of the first. It reveals a deep dissatisfaction with the circumstances of one's life and the inability to undo the things that happen to you. It's a line I imagine resonates with trauma survivors. When the pain you carry feels inseparable from who you are, the only conceivable relief is to become someone else entirely, anybody but you. This desire makes us vulnerable to comparison, especially in a world mediated by performance. Online, we're surrounded by curated selves, each projecting fulfillment and certainty. Instead of seeing the mask people wear to conceal their pain, we see lives that appear effortless and complete, lives that seem more livable than our own. Coming from Beth Gibbons, the refrain takes on an almost maternal sorrow. Her voice carries not just Kendrick's grief, but the grief of anyone who's ever felt consumed by their past. For Kendrick's healing journey, this refrain is a core admission, a necessary naming of the wound that's driven so much of his behavior. As he mines deeper into his psyche, the image of the mirror grows sharper. Identifying and articulating that pain is what allows the illusion to fall away. The ego can no longer hide behind bravado, sex, or success. Performative masculinity is revealed as a charade. Sex is exposed as desperate attempts at self-worth. Cars and jewelry are ornamental armor, disguising a body that has long struggled with feeling worthless.
I remember looking in the mirror, knowing I was gifted, only child, me for 7 years, everything for Christmas, family ties. They accused my cousin, did he touch you, Kendrick? Never lied, but no one believed me when I said he didn't. Frozen moments, still holding on it, hard to trust myself. I started rhyming, coping mechanisms to lift up myself. Talked to my lawyer, told me not to be so hard on myself. He has an aura I hope to achieve. If I find some help, congratulations.
Kendrick's fragmented storytelling continues in verse 2. He begins, I remember looking in the mirror, knowing I was gifted. Only child, me for 7 years, everything for Christmas. The symbol of the mirror is evoked again, now during a time in which his sense of self-worth was still intact. The image of being a gifted only child for 7 years and receiving everything for Christmas evokes early abundance, but also loneliness. It might also allude to the vulnerability of being a child frequently alone around adults. The memory of this time before generational pain and guilt began to distort his reflection deepens the trauma described in the first verse, showing the innocence and self-confidence that was lost. The verse then shifts abruptly from this moment of early clarity to the roots of his trauma, heightening that contrast between innocence and loss. He says, family ties, they accused my cousin. Did he touch you, Kendrick? Never lied, but no one believed me when I said he didn't. Frozen moments, still holding on to it, hard to trust myself. Like witnessing the physical abuse his mother suffered, Kendrick hones in on another precise moment that fractured the mirror of his self-image, where the accusation of being sexually abused by his cousin became its own form of trauma. At just 5 or 7 years old, Kendrick's family projected their fears onto him, and crucially, his voice was dismissed. He was telling the truth, but no one believed him. And assuming that the grown-ups around him knew better than he did, that disbelief planted a seed of self-doubt that grew into a general distrust of his own perception, a feeling that his experience of reality may be wrong or distorted, hence his line, "hard to trust myself." He describes this as being another frozen moment, mirroring the paralyzing feeling that overcame him when witnessing his mother being beaten. What Kendrick was experiencing in these moments is what psychologists identify as the freeze response, a hardwired survival mechanism that kicks in when fighting or fleeing is impossible. In situations of fear or helplessness, especially during childhood, the body can shut down as an instinctive attempt to minimize threat. While this response may protect the body in the moment, psychologists say that it often leaves survivors carrying chronic shame or confusion, blaming themselves for doing quote-unquote nothing. Kendrick's recognition that these frozen moments seeded his self-doubt reflects the kind of deep introspection that therapy aims to facilitate, surfacing unconscious patterns in order to disarm them. He then continues his self-analysis. "I started rhyming coping mechanisms to lift up myself." Music here is positioned as a restorative act, an outlet through which he found validation that offset his self-doubt. It confirmed that his intuition was right. He was gifted, so maybe his view of reality wasn't as warped as he thought. This is followed by another quick pivot. "Talked to my lawyer, told me not to be so hard on myself. He has an aura I hope to achieve if I find some help." It appears to be a somewhat random inclusion until we hone in on the phrase, "if I find some help." This conversation took place before therapy, when he was still carrying the full weight of his trauma alone. In this context, it makes more sense that Kendrick would open up to someone like his lawyer, whose calm or clarity was something Kendrick wanted to possess himself. In the absence of professional help, he reached out in the ways he could, looking for models of stability wherever they appeared. This moment feels less about the lawyer himself and more about what he represents, someone further down the path, someone who appears whole. Kendrick opening up to him feels instinctive, a sign that even before therapy, he was already trying to heal.
Some help, congratulations, made it to be famous. Still I feel uneasy, water watching, live my life in nature. Only thing believes me, spirit God, whisper in my ear, tell me that she sees me. Did he touch you? I said no again, still they didn't believe me. Mother's brother said he got revenge for my mother's face. Black and blue, the image of my queen that I can't erase. Till this day, can't look her in the eyes. Pain is taking over, blame myself. You never felt guilt till you felt it sober.
Mother I Sober's second verse continues with another abrupt shift in the timeline. Kendrick raps, "Congratulations, made it to be famous, still I feel uneasy." The congratulations here feels somewhat sarcastic. Like so many of us, a younger Kendrick likely believed fame and fortune would remedy all of his problems. However, To Pimp a Butterfly and Damn were in large part evidence of the fallacy of this very common delusion. As Kendrick often said in interviews, fame and fortune only gave him more access to his vices. The betrayal of fame being a detriment as much as it is a benefit likely only deepened the existential questions raised in the song's refrain. Because if extreme wealth and endless external validation can't satiate your ego and bring contentment, then what the hell ever will? Next we get another shift to the present day. Water watching, live my life in nature, only thing relieves me. Spirit guide, whisper in my ear, tell me that she sees me. Once again, Kendrick describes the stillness and presence of nature as his only source of solace, which are core practices of mindfulness and trauma recovery. The second line introduces a spirit guide, a non-physical being assigned to guide a person's spiritual development. Spirit guides are often imagined as ancestors, animal spirits, angels, or archetypal figures who offer wisdom and emotional support, particularly during times of transformation or trauma. In many belief systems, a spirit guide doesn't appear randomly. They reveal themselves when the seeker is ready, often during meditation, grief, or intense periods of emotional change. Notably, Kendrick's guide is female, continuing the thread of the divine feminine woven throughout the album. Like Whitney and Beth Gibbons, this feminine spirit acts as a mirror of compassion. She sees the totality of Kendrick's spirit in a way another human being never could. This serene image of Kendrick with his spirit guide in nature is suddenly disrupted by another abrupt flashback of trauma. Voicing his mother again, she asks, "Did he touch you?" To which Kendrick responds, "I said no again, still they didn't believe me." Kendrick repeating this question in the verse mirrors his experience of hearing it repeated throughout his childhood, as well as the memory of it cycling through his mind over time. His answer hasn't changed, but his mother still won't accept it, deepening the wound of young Kendrick's distrust of self. Narratively, the repetition of the question also makes clear to us listeners that it's crucial to the story. It's likely some of us without experience with this form of trauma would wonder why that question is even a problem. Isn't Kendrick's mom just looking out for him? This creates narrative and thematic tension that will pay off in verse 3, when Kendrick eventually understands exactly why his mother asks him so compulsively. Kendrick then continues, "Mother's brother said he got revenge for my mother's face, black and blue, the image of my queen that I can't erase." The assumption here is that Kendrick's uncle took violent revenge on the family member who abused his sister, Kendrick's mother. The severity of that violence isn't clear yet. He could have beaten him up, stabbed or shot him, or even killed him. The close proximity of this line to the questions about a cousin touching Kendrick may imply a connection. If his mother asked Kendrick about it repeatedly, then it stands to reason that she could have confronted the cousin directly. The false accusation of molestation may have triggered a violent outburst, resulting in the attack on his mother that little Kendrick witnessed as a child. While this is of course speculative, it would exponentially compound the guilt young Kendrick carried. Not only would he be confused by the questions, he'd also feel responsible for his mother's abuse, not just because he froze, but because no one believed him, leading to a false accusation, which led to his mother's assault, which led to his uncle's violent retaliation. In this scenario, Kendrick could have easily blamed himself for all of it, an unimaginable burden for a child to bear. In any case, the trauma of these events severely impacted Kendrick's relationship with his mother, as we get the absolutely crushing final lines of the verse. "Till this day, can't look her in the eyes, pain is taking over. Blame myself, you never felt guilt till you felt it sober." The weight of a line like this is almost too much to bear. His own mother's eyes have become a trigger for his trauma. He cannot look at her without reliving the overwhelming guilt he's harbored for decades. The vulnerability and bravery in not just saying this out loud, but committing it to record should not go overlooked. We have reached a level of raw honesty that is rare not in just hip-hop, not in just music, but all art forms across all mediums. This level of self-revelation is the result of sustained, painful reflection, sitting soberly with one's own discomfort, turning over moments most of us would rather bury. Because Kendrick endured this difficult process, he can access memories and emotions that rarely surface in art with such clarity and emotional precision. The image of his mother's eyes as a mirror of his own trauma is tragically specific, so specific that we feel its truth. What should reflect love and safety now stares back as a reminder of the guilt and shame he never deserved to carry. Indeed, here at the end of Mother I Sober's second verse, we've already become deeply entrenched in rarely charted emotional terrain. Kendrick has relived the trauma of witnessing his mother's abuse, exposed the root of his lifelong self-doubt, questioned his faith, and brought us inside his guilt, grief, and suppressed shame. We've witnessed him unearth generational wounds buried beneath his vices, confront cultural barriers around Black male vulnerability, and begin the painful, necessary work that true healing requires. And yet, the most profound reckoning is still ahead. Mother I Sober's third and final verse, a grueling 48-bar emotional summit that functions as the entire album's climax. The moment Kendrick fully excavates his soul, confesses his addiction, and connects his story to the violence that has haunted Black families for generations. We'll take a deep, conscious breath and examine it all, note by note, line by line, next time on Dissect.